Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 270. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm joined by author Victoria Dillon to talk about her debut novel, Ava. The story follows Larkin, a young woman forced by her state's laws to carry a nonviable pregnancy to term. The loss she suffers shapes every choice she makes thereafter. Years later, determined to reclaim her bodily autonomy, she turns to a radical genetic technology during her second pregnancy. Her daughter, Ava, is born healthy, but the altered DNA leaves Ava with a reproductive system unlike any humans. She can only lay eggs. Such a radical biological shift raises a host of new questions about agency, ethics, and inheritance for Ava and the other girls like her. In this episode, I'll chat with Victoria about her writing journey, the surprising research that went into understanding the egg-laying process, and the powerful reactions readers have had to this emotionally charged story, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Victoria Dillon, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your debut novel, Ava. If you don't mind, tell us a bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Ava is about a young woman who lives in Tennessee who learns that she's pregnant with a baby with a lethal anomaly, and the physical and emotional toll it takes on her when she has to carry the baby to term. This experience leads her then to make a pivotal decision for her second child, and she volunteers for an experiment that will change her daughter's DNA and has some profound consequences for her reproductive life.
So the science in this, because there is some science to the story, and I was hoping maybe you can kind of walk us through it, and in particular, explain for listeners what part of it is real and how much of it is so quote unquote science fiction, the fictional part of the story.
Yeah, so there is quite a bit of science in the book. So I am a pediatrician, but before I went to medical school, I did research for 4 years. I was a research assistant in a lab where we focused on the development of facial features and facial structures in an avian embryo, comparing that to a human embryo. So my original research dealt a lot with chickens and eggs and developmental biology and comparative embryology. So I was very familiar with chickens in that way. In the book, the main character, her eggs undergo a transformation of her DNA. So a segment of her DNA, which codes for the human reproductive system, is replaced by an avian reproductive system. So this technology is already there. I didn't use the term in the book, but it's CRISPR technology, which is used for lots of different scientific research for development of vaccines. So that portion is already there. The fiction portion of it, of course, is no one is doing these types of experiments on humans because, for one, it would be unethical and hopefully never needed. So it does cross an ethical boundary in the book that the main character agrees to this experimentation.
And the result is for your main character Larkin, and I want to talk about her in a second, but the result for her of undergoing or participating in this experiment is that she has a successful second pregnancy. That baby survives, and she is Ava,
Yes.
title of the book. But the story doesn't just end there. Let's talk about the aftermath of this. What results? I mean, Ava comes into the world, and then things get interesting, as if they weren't interesting before. And then things get interesting. So let's talk a little bit about Larkin and Ava, in particular, how they came about individually as characters, how you saw them, and then how they grow together, apart, parallel to each other, and their own development in the story.
Yes. So, of course, the story does get very strange as it continues. It initially starts as a story of pregnancy and loss, but then it evolves to the main character, whose name is Larkin, deciding to undergo this experimental procedure. And her motivation is because of the loss of her first child during the time when versus Wade has been overturned. So the book is set years into the future, and the restrictive laws that are in Tennessee become more restrictive, where she is unable to travel out of state to terminate the pregnancy as she wanted. And the toll that took on her, she never wanted her child to not have the body autonomy that she lost. But then she makes this decision to alter her child's DNA before she's even born. So the irony of the story is she takes away her own child's choice by then giving her this reproductive anatomy to then be able to lay eggs like a chicken. So, like I said, this is where it gets strange. But she does it out of pure love, out of pure protection, to make sure her daughter is ever having to experience this. After Ava is born, Larkin isn't quite sure if this experiment was a success. She works in a research laboratory, which is based on what I did when I was younger. And her mentor was the one who actually came up with the procedure. So they know the DNA was spliced and it was replaced, but they don't know if it worked or not. So when Ava is 10, she starts questioning she had a friend who started her period, and she asks her mother, when will I start? My friend was only, 10 or 11. Am I going to start soon? And her mother tells her, well, your dad and I have told you were always made unique. And so we think you may be different and you may not have a period. And so Ava's confused by this, and her mother takes her to a friend of hers who's an OBGYN. They do an ultrasound of Ava's internal anatomy, and they see that she has a single ovary and an oviduct like an avian species. So externally, she looks the same as any other child, but internally, she has the reproductive structure of a chicken, so that means that someday she should be able to lay eggs. Ava at first is pretty horrified by this idea. She thinks it's very strange. She doesn't know whether to believe them or not. And later in the book, there's an incident where Ava ends up laying her first egg when she's 15. And she's very angry with her parents for putting her through this and not understanding why they did this. And a portion of the book, probably my favorite part of the book, was the research that went into learning how chickens lay eggs. And so that was the fun part for me, was learning about the avian reproductive system and what triggers them to lay eggs. And it's through sunlight. So the reasons why chickens lay eggs more in the springtime is because of more sunlight and less in the wintertime. So they tell Ava when she gets older, and if she's going to be outside in a significant amount of sunlight, that she needs to wear sunglasses. Well, she doesn't one day, and she ends up developing this egg. So this, of course, is very stressful to her and upsetting to her. She's angry with her parents. She feels they made her into a freak. She doesn't really understand why they did this to her. Larkin eventually explains to her more in detail what happened to her little sister. Her name was Maeve, who passed away from this lethal, excuse me, her big sister, I'm so sorry, who passed away from this lethal anomaly, and the tragedy that she went through with her. So Ava's able to gain some understanding of why her mom decided to make this huge change in Ava's life.
And for anybody listening, I'm sure they can imagine if they were in Ava's shoes. That would be a pretty shocking discovery. And to learn about it at a young age. It's one thing maybe as an adult to try and wrap your head around the motivations behind your parents' actions and the consequences that you now are forced to live with. I mean, that's some pretty heavy stuff. But to lay that on, say, a 13-year-old, that's that's a lot. That's asking a lot. I'm sure there were probably times when you were writing this book where those passages were challenging, were emotionally challenging to write.
Oh, absolutely. Even though, the process that chickens have to go about laying an egg all seems rather kind of simplified and easier than a lot of the things that women experience with giving birth. It's such a strange concept for a human to be able to do that. And after Ava goes through her experience, there are other young girls whose parents agreed to have their DNA altered that will be coming up in the world. They're not addressed in the book, but they are also going to have this same ability as Ava. So she won't be alone in the world. There are going to be thousands and thousands of other young women who are going to have this ability. All of these women who volunteered to undergo this experiment were secondary to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And in the book, restrictions on reproductive freedom become more and more restrictive. So the book also addresses ending access to birth control. It addresses women being tracked after they find out they're pregnant. They're entered into a database to make sure that they carry the baby to term. So as these women are losing all of their reproductive rights, they're desperately looking for an alternative to be able to restore some of that reproductive autonomy to their own daughters. And that was the impetus for the book. I started writing after Roe versus Wade was overturned in the summer of 2022. And that was the inspiration for this.
You make a point of setting it in Tennessee. So let's talk a little bit about the reasons behind setting it. I mean, I know you're familiar with Tennessee. If you don't mind, you could talk a little bit about that. But what is it about setting it there in the South, in a place that has restrictive laws, that sort of thing? What was it that helped form the book and your choices about character and plot and all those things? And were there times when it wasn't such a help? There were hindrances to setting it there.
So the South is pretty much all that I know and where I've grown up and lived. Not just Tennessee has been my home for the past 25 years, but I've lived in other areas in the South. And I realized what an appropriate setting it was when a couple of years ago, Anne Applebaum, who is a journalist and an author, she's a fantastic writer, and she writes for The Atlantic. She wrote an article in 2023 after Covenant school shooting in Nashville, and she wrote about the political climate here. And the name of the article was called Is Tennessee Really a Democracy? And it talks about how the political climate has changed over the last 14 years and the stronghold that conservatives have in the state. So that was an important article for me to read because it let me really truly understand that this was the right time and right setting for the book. She also, Anne Applebaum, was in an interview about a week later from that article, and she talked about doing research for it. And the research that she did was actually in the county where I live in, and she referred to it as the reddest county in the reddest state, which I found that uh, a little bit alarming, but also, as I said, I realized what a good setting it was for a book such as this, where legislation continues to evolve and become more restrictive.
Mm. So when you were writing the story, I assume in the back of your mind, maybe in the forefront, maybe you attacked the story with these specific things in mind, but there were probably certain themes or perhaps questions or issues that you wanted readers to discover, evaluate, wrestle with as they read the book. So, can you talk a little bit about what you hoped readers would take from the book, what you hoped they would grapple with as they made their way through the story?
Yeah, so I think, the audience for the book is probably going to be like-minded people like me. It's going to be more science-loving nerds. But who I hope reads it are people who don't think like me and who feel that what they're doing with the pro-life movement is absolutely 100% the right thing to do. And I do understand that those people who are staunchly pro-life, they truly feel that they are doing the right thing and that they feel that it's righteous and they are saving babies' lives. But I really want them to look at situations where maybe it isn't the right thing and maybe it wasn't the right choice for the mother. And especially the first part of the book where Larkin goes through this pregnancy, a doomed pregnancy where she's going to lose this baby in the end, and the suffering that she goes through. And these legislative decisions have real consequences. The character is based on someone I knew many years ago who had an older child. She was pregnant with a baby with the same condition. It's called anencephaly. The brain didn't develop. And she decided she just couldn't go through the pregnancy with having her older child constantly asking, when is my baby sister coming? When is she going to be here? Or strangers approaching her, when they see a pregnant woman and tell her, congratulations, when is your baby due? She just knew mentally that was something that she could not handle. She was not able to get the care that she needed in Tennessee. She had to travel out of state. When she came back from Tennessee, she was harshly judged by some people who felt what she did was absolutely wrong. But she did what she needed to for her mental and emotional well-being. And when the Dobbs decision was made, I thought about her and what it would have been like for her had she not been able to travel out of state. And that was the inspiration for Larkin, who then has to go through this pregnancy and the tragedy that she endures. And I don't think I'll change any minds with the book. I think for some people it'll just reinforce what they already believe and what they already think. But I'm hoping that for others who think differently, maybe it'll give them a different perspective. That's really my hope with the book. I'm not trying to come across as preachy or political in the book, but ultimately I think that's what it does, but that's not my intent. I just really want to give and what I think is an empathetic look at the other side and what some women have to go through due to the decisions of others.
Yeah. Well, what has been the feedback you've received from people who have read the book? So I'm thinking, friends, family, your editors, early readers, because the book has just recently come out. So have you had any conversations with people who have read early copies of it? And have any of those conversations surprised you?
Yeah, so I have gotten feedback from friends, but also from beta readers and readers of the advanced reader copy. And generally, the women who have read it agree with the sentiments in the book. A lot of them feel the same way, share that kind of frustration and anger over, not being able to make decisions for themselves in certain areas. They are a bit, I guess, shocked by the solution that's offered in the book, of course, and that's meant to spark, discussion. Okay.
Right, right.
Um, but what I was really surprised about was how many male readers were touched by it. And so many that said after they read the chapter where Larkin loses her first baby that they cried. And that really touched me. And it's people that I know that I've never seen them cry before. So I was really surprised by that. And I hope that others are touched in the same way and have some empathy for this character and understand that this is a real situation. It's fictionalized, but this is absolutely what can happen to someone if they don't have that choice.
This is your debut novel, and it's a heavy topic to tackle. It's a heavy topic to tackle for anybody, particularly someone coming out with their first novel. So, were you always a writer? Is this something that you have been working towards since you were a child, or is writing something you have come to later? I mean, did this book find you? Is this your sort of first foray into it?
Yes, I'm not a writer. The last thing I wrote creatively was, college English papers. I'm an avid reader. My dad was an English professor, so I always read growing up, but I didn't have any aspirations of writing. But I truly was inspired after the overturning of the Dobbs decision. The day after that happened in, what was it, June of 2022, I was included in a group chat, text chat with friends of mine from the same small town that I had grown up in North Carolina. And we were all sharing how upset we were over the decision and what this meant for young women and how we felt pretty powerless to do anything. And after, we chatted for a while, the conversation waned. I went back to my weekend and again thought about the friend of mine who went through that horrible experience with her child. And then my mind also wandered to my 10th grade biology class where our biology teacher was telling us about what it's like to actually have a baby. I think she was trying to scare a bunch of 14 and 15-year-olds into never having sex again. ever, I mean, not having sex again, but ever having sex, by telling us, how hard it can be to deliver a baby. And she was telling us how they don't come out, all clean and pretty and cooing. And she said they're bloody and cheesy and crying and it hurts. I remember just thinking, this is awful. And even back then, I was thinking how much easier chickens had it. I mean, it's just this random thought as a teenager. And I thought, wouldn't it be much more pleasant to lay an egg and have it hatched? It all sounds much more peaceful and wonderful. So, that weekend just I was wondering, how can I combine these two concepts, the overturning of Roe versus Wade with laying eggs like a chicken, and thus Ava, the idea was hatched from that.
Pun absolutely intended. Okay, so where do you go from here? I mean, your debut novel is this very creative, complicated, heavy issued story. Where do you go from here? Is there a second book in you? Do you think this is your voice tackling these kinds of issues, marrying social or political issues with sci-fi or speculative, fictional kind of narrative? I'm curious if there's a work in progress or plans for other books, or do you just sit back and wait for sort of the next idea to come?
Originally, I wrote this for myself, not expecting to actually get it published or have anyone else read it. I considered it kind of my own fictionalized op-ed piece. And after I completed it and found a publisher and had other people read it and react to it, I did have people ask me, will you continue to write? And they also were asking about a sequel. And I do have ideas for a sequel because in the book, it ends on a very hopeful note. Even though it sounds kind of very dark and dystopian, it ends in a good way, I think. And as I mentioned earlier, although Ava was the first to be able to have this ability, there are thousands of these young women who are going to grow up to also have this ability. So it would be another speculative book about having these other women who are able to lay eggs and what that would mean for society. Because I know it all sounds so strange, but if you really think about it, chickens are cool. You know,
Mhm.
being able to lay eggs, you wouldn't need contraception anymore. So a contraception ban wouldn't matter. The way you reproduce would be when you are exposed to long periods of sunlight. So you don't need hormones anymore. You don't need IUDs. You don't need Nexplanon. It would just be taking your sunglasses off for an extended period of time would cause you then to start producing an egg. Of course, you'd need a male in the process too, but it would be kind of an end to unplanned pregnancies in that way, because it would be pretty difficult to not plan a pregnancy. It would be an end to periods, which would have, economical impact on society. Women would no longer need to have pads or feminine hygiene products. It would be an end to period poverty. It would have environmental impacts by not having that type of waste. So there are a lot of cool things that to be able to expound upon in a sequel, and also a dark side to it as well, because with a government still being in control who isn't happy with these changes, how would they then corrupt this new way of reproduction for their own benefit? So a sequel, I think, would have some hope in it, but would also have a lot darker components than there are currently in the book that I wrote.
Interesting. I'm sure there are women listening that are saying, maybe tell me more. That's, that doesn't sound all bad, actually.
Exactly. One of the things that I've had other people ask me about was the cover. So I usually like to give credit for the cover to my publisher and their team because they did such a good job with designing it.
Yeah, it's a very cool cover. I'm sure that will serve you well.
I hope so. We'll see. There's so many books out there. I've heard that there are, 2 million books published a year. So, yeah, if people find it, I think they'll like it. But it's tough to find things. There are a lot of good books out there. When I was listening to your podcast to other books, I just kept thinking, I hope other people listen to this and discover these books because, everyone reads essentially a lot of the same things. And it makes me sad to think there are a lot of great books out there that no one's going to hear about unless they listen to podcasts like yours and discover these authors who may not have a platform otherwise, who don't have the social media. So I appreciate you doing this, Stacy, because I think there are a lot of talented people out there that others won't know about without your help.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks. And it is the primary reason why I started this podcast to begin with, is to help authors like myself, like you, who aren't front and center when you walk into your big box bookstore. So yes. So fingers crossed, people check out this episode, all the
Yeah.
others, purchase your book, all the others, and we get people discovering new authors. So book 2 possibly in the works. I'm sure people are excited to hear that. In the meantime, if people want to learn more about you and learn more about the book, where should they go to find you and that information?
Yes. So I do have a website. It's victoriadillonauthor.com. And you can find my book on Bookshop, Target, Walmart, Barnes and Nobles, Amazon. So lots of different choices to purchase it. Of course, my preference would be to go to your local indie bookstore and ask them to order it to support your independent bookstores because they are one of the best resources we have, or go to your library. I'm in my local library here. And so that would be a great way for others uh, to read it. And if you like it, please contact me. Let me know what you thought of it. And I hope everyone enjoys it.
Good. Well, Victoria, I want to thank you for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Ava, your debut novel, and book 2, when the time comes to sit and write that. We wish you luck with that and look forward to that. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much, Stacy. I appreciate your time. And I hope you get a chance to read it as well. The sequel, by the way, would be called Ava's. Ava, by the way, means little bird. So the title is a spoiler. So, but thank you very much for this opportunity, and I appreciate your time.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.